Our text for tonight will be 1 Kings chapter 17 and beginning with verse 1. If you want to turn over there, it's a pretty lengthy reading. 1 Kings chapter 17 beginning with verse 1. While you're turning over there, let me say that I'm thankful to God for the opportunity to stand here and speak tonight. But I'm also thank you for the privilege of allowing me to talk to you tonight. I really appreciate that. Tonight we're going to talk about Elijah and one of the great prophets. I'm going to read the reading and then give you a little background on Elijah, and then we'll go back and take a look at a few lessons that we can draw from our reading tonight. Elijah is a really interesting person in the Old Testament. In Romans 15 and verse 4, see if I can quote this correctly, it says, "The things that are written aforetime were written for our learning, that through patience and encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope." A wonderful passage and very applicable to us tonight because we're going to be reading something from the Old Testament. And there's always things that in the Old Testament that are foreshadowing other things that come later. There's always, usually always, a figurative meaning, a spiritual meaning kind of looming in the background. And it was the New Testament. Well, let me give you the saying. The saying is the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. Very, very old saying, but how very true. And we see that time and time again, and tonight will be no different from that expression. So let's get into it and think about the prophet Elijah tonight. So beginning with verse 1, 1 Kings chapter 17, it says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word.' The word of the Lord came to him, saying, 'Go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there.' So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. For he went and lived by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. It happened after a while that the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, 'Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you.' So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he had come to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, 'Please, get me a little water in a jar that I may drink.' And she was going to get it, as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, 'Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand.' But she said, 'As the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I am gathering a few sticks that I may go in and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat and die.' Then Elijah said to her, 'Do not fear. Go, do as I have said. Make me a little bread from the first and but make me a little bread cake from it first and bring it out to me, and afterwards you may make one for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah. Now it came to pass about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick. And his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, "What do I have to do with you, O man of God? You have come to bring me my iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death?" He said to her, "Give me your son." Then he took him from her bosom and carried him up to the upper room where he was living and laid him on his own bed. He called to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, have you also brought calamity to the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him." The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Well, there's so many things that could be said, and we're going to say a few of them tonight. But just, some of the lessons that we can draw from that. Remember that when Jesus is transfigured in Matthew chapter 17, verse 4, that the 2 figures that appear with him, those 2 men, are those 2 famous men, are Moses and Elijah. It's a significant moment. And in between Moses and Jesus, Elijah is the only one representing the prophets on that day. What a great prophet. We understand that he was from Tishbite, or Tishbith, but that's really all we know about him. He's a lot like Melchizedek in the book of Genesis, with the story of the account that goes along with Abraham. How that all of a sudden, he's just there. All of a sudden, he's the king of Salem, and he brings out things to Abraham, and the spoils that are given, the tithes that are given from Abraham to Melchizedek. But Elijah's just like that in many ways. All of a sudden, he's just there. And it's interesting that his appearance is during one of the darkest eras of Israel's history. The king at that particular time was Ahab. And Ahab had a lovely wife called Jezebel. And they were 2 of the most despicable characters in Israel's history. And the paganism, the worship of idols that was going on, and the things that passed as worship, you wouldn't even want to hear about. The way that they worshiped God in paganism and the things that they did, horrible, horrible things. We've talked before about Moloch and how that later on they would take the infant children and slide them into Moloch's mouth, and there was a slide that would go all the way down into a pit of fire. And the whole valley of Hinnom was full of the screams of those children being killed. And that was their worship. That was part of the way that they worshiped the god Moloch, the false god, of course. But this is another despicable period. It's a dark day, and Elijah arises to fill the need of the people, to save the people of Israel. Elijah's place in the New Testament reveals his importance. He is the forerunner of Christ. Luke chapter 1 and verse 17, Jesus said that Elijah would come, but it would be the spirit and power of Elijah. God's two witnesses in Revelation chapter 11, verse 6, surely tie in with this. One of the witnesses has the power to keep it from raining. He has control over the water to keep it from raining. The other witness has the power to turn water into blood. Sound familiar? Moses and Elijah. And here in this account, we read about that. As long as my words, until I say so, Elijah says, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Until I say so, it's not going to rain on the earth at all. We learn later in the New Testament that was for 3.5 years. If you can imagine, I know a lot of people have talked about, droughts that have happened here in this area. Can you imagine 3.5 years of no rain? It wiped everything out. And even though Ahab and Jezebel shared luxury at one particular time, it's interesting too. Did you notice in the story that there's an upper chamber to the house where the widow is staying? She was a person of at least substance enough to have a house that is strong enough to have an upper level to it, and yet that drought wiped everybody out. What a horrible time. But it showed one thing, and we'll talk about that thing later. Many people in Judaism today still leave a chair empty at some of their festivals, and that chair is for Elijah. And it's kind of an interesting thing because in the book of Malachi it says that before the Messiah comes, Elijah will make his appearance, and that's what that empty chair is for. But the sad part of that, it's good because they realize that Malachi is true, and what was said would be a true thing. But it's sad because they still leave that chair empty, and that chair belongs to John the Immerser. And they say, well, no. Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, chapter 4 also, it says that, it's going to be Elijah that's going to come. Jesus said that John came in the spirit and power of Elijah, that he was the Elijah to come. And the Jews today, many of them, will say, no, we can't buy that. And the sad part about that is that in Luke 1, verse 17, Zechariah, John the Immerser's father, a priest of Israel, has an angel. Remember, he was struck mute. He couldn't speak until his son was born. And the very first thing he said is his name will be John. Remember that guy? That guy, an angel appeared to him and told him he will go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. Wow. Just like Jesus looking back at John, that was foretold by an angel to his father, that he was the Elijah that was to come. Wonderful. All right, that's the background stuff. Let's talk about some of the other stuff. Let's get into the sermon now. You're just now starting the sermon? No, we're going to be okay. Let's take a look at just a few lessons tonight. Elijah's purpose was to save Israel from the worship of another god, not Moloch this time, but most people say Baal. I say Baal. It doesn't matter. This false god that they were enslaved to and under the direction. It was just earlier that Elijah had confronted 450 priests of that god, Baal, and soaked down a sacrifice and had fire come down from heaven and not only demonstrated the power of God, but also the superior power of God over Baal, because they cried out to him all day long. And then they got so weary of doing that because Elijah was the one taunting them. Maybe he can't hear you. Do it a little louder, right? And taunting them. And they got so desperate to have Baal act on their behalf that they took knives and began to cut themselves all over their body, believing that if they were being hurt, that maybe their false god would pay attention to them. And that didn't work either. Elijah gives the victory to God and his people on that day. That was in Mount Carmel. And I didn't even tell Kathy this. We got back on a ship in Haifa on the coast, and Mount Carmel is right in the background. It's a real place. That's the one thing I really love about getting to visit places like that, is that you come away with the realization, real places, real people, real events. The Bible is history. It's not just a fairy tale book like a lot of people will, tell you, try to convince you of. These things really happen. In the end, 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 11, Elijah was translated to heaven without dying. What a great prophet. And that story that's told, of course, it's not true. But one day, Elijah and God were talking, and they were going for a walk. And God said, you know what, you're closer to my house than yours. Why don't you just go ahead and come along with me, right? Not true. It's a preacher story, but still, the translation of Elijah at the end of his life is a very, very real thing. And it's also interesting, Bible trivia, that Moses' death was unusual. Moses was taken by God. He died somewhere. But even Michael the archangel is disputing with Satan later on in another passage about where Moses is buried. We don't know where he's buried. Do we know where Jesus is buried? Pretty much. But he's not there, right? And that's what one of my preachers was having a discussion with an Islamic preacher on one occasion. And he said, we feel so sorry for you Christians because you don't know where your prophet is buried. And my friend came right back at him and said, oh, don't feel sorry for us. If we knew where our prophet was buried, our faith would be worthless because he's raised from the dead. Our text unfolds with Elijah saying that it's not going to rain. Elijah obeyed the Lord. He went Trans-Jordan is what it's called, over to the eastern side and stayed for a while until that brook that God provided for him dried up. Ravens giving him bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening, and drinking from the brook until that ended. And then God told him, and get to Zarephath, and I have no idea where that is. But anyway, he went to there, and when he got to the gates of the city, he saw the widow, that it had been provided for him. That widow was picking up sticks. And my first impression when I read this years ago was that she was going to cook the sticks. That is not true. She was getting the sticks together to make a fire, okay? And she was going to make bread out of that little bit of flour and that little bit of oil, and they were going to have their last meal, because after that they were going to eat it, and then they were going to starve to death because there wasn't anything else going on. And we remember the wonderful, wonderful thing. Where Elijah says, do what I say. Give me a drink, yes, but make me a small cake first of the bread and bring it to me first. And if you do that and then make something else for yourself, if you share it, then the bread will never run out. The oil will never run out until it rains. And when is it going to rain? You remember, don't you, at the beginning of the sermon? It's going to rain when Elijah says so, when it's ready to happen. And as it turned out, that is exactly what happened. It says, fear not, go and do as you have said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make one for you and your son. For thus saith the Lord of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the face of the earth. One of the lessons that we can learn from this is that whenever we think about serving others first, it's exemplified here in this example, that Elijah tells the widow, give me some first, and she does. And the natural reaction of people who do not believe in God would be, you got to be kidding, buddy. I am not giving you any of this last meal that we have. We're going to eat the whole thing, and good luck to you. Okay? That's the natural reaction today. But this woman, this pious woman, takes a little bit of it and gives it to him first, and then shares the rest. And look, and even though I wouldn't expect that a miracle would happen today in the way that it did back then, but there is that spiritual meaning today, that if we take the time and make the effort, and sometimes even make the sacrifice, God can turn that sacrifice into a wonderful thing for us as well, if we are not selfish. The widow was not selfish. Galatians 6 verse 10, Paul said, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all people, especially to those who are of the household of faith. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 15, Paul also says, see that none render evil for evil unto any person, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all people. The widow also learned that you can't lose by giving. Another challenge that Elijah had to face was the son of the woman. And even though it's I guess a small lesson, it's something to think about, and I just wanted to share it tonight for whatever good that will bring about in your life by hearing it. And that is that even though she, a lot like Job, was not happy about the first part of this, because her son became sick and he died. There was no breath left in him at all. And he's like, God, did you do this to me? And there's the false perception. And you see it in Job's friends as well. When bad things, when he got sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, and he was in so much agony that he sat down in a pit and put ashes upon himself, and he used a rock, a sharp rock, to scrape those boils and to open them up. That was the low state that he ended in. And his friends came and sat around, I guess to console him, but eventually they ended up saying, you sinned. That's why this is happening to you. Please understand that if we sin, bad things can happen to us. But please also understand that what Job and this widow finally came to understand is that just because something is bad is happening to you, it doesn't automatically mean that you're a bad person. It just means that you are a person. Things like that happen. And you say, well, I don't have any trouble in my life. Be patient. It's coming, right? We all go through troubles. Those storms are out there, and we're going to go through them. And bad things can happen. And for most of us, bad things will happen. And it's not, as long as we're following God and doing what He says, it's not because we're a sinful person. It's not because of some sin. It's not consequences for something that we've done wrong. It can very well be like the widow, found out, even though she accused God. Why in the world is this happening? Have you ever thought that? I know I have. Why in the world is this happening to me when I'm trying my best to follow God and look at all this stuff that's happening? Why? And finally, and I'll just read it here. What have I to do with you, O you man of God? Have you come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? Is it because she was a sinner? No. He said, give me your son. And he showed her something. He stretched himself over. I imagine him hovering over the child and draws himself back and does it twice and does it 3 times. I don't know whether there's something special about 3 in this passage. I don't know if Naaman 7 was special, wasn't it? He had to dip 7 times in the River Jordan. And I love Marshall Keeble, the way he did this when I was younger. He said, and he went and dipped himself the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and the 6th time, and he was still the same, right? And he dipped himself 7 times. And his flesh became as a newborn child, Naaman, that is. Well, Elijah outstretched himself over the child 3 times, and he prayed. He prayed, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son? And in verses 21 through 24 that we already read, the son is revived and brought back to life. And as happens so often, even with Jesus later, brought the son back down from the upper chamber and put her back into the arms of his mother, and everything was great. The widow learned that God's power is sufficient. O Lord God, I pray thee, let the child's soul come to him again. And God intervened. Today, we might not expect a miracle like this, but God's power is always sufficient if we have faith, if we continue to follow God even when the times are difficult. We saw a widow today, and we saw what the interaction was between the widow and Elijah. The widow, nothing is ever written about her again. Elijah becomes that great and famous prophet that stands alongside Jesus in the Transfiguration. But wasn't that widow great? Wasn't the sacrifice that she made something to think about? The things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, that through patience and comfort of the scriptures, we too, I'm adding the word too, we might have hope, us too, to be able to be expecting good things from God when we follow his word, when we're willing to sacrifice to help others, when we're willing to try to see things in perspective, to see the purpose of God in our life. If somebody does need to come forward tonight, we always want to give you that opportunity. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. It was a simple one, but I hope you see the power in the example that's left to us from Elijah during those days and from that widow. We always offer it. If someone wants to come forward tonight in public to become a Christian, we have time. In fact, I'm done early tonight. We have time. Why don't you come? We always have time. Come forward. Be baptized into Christ. Come forward for prayers of the church. We'll be more than happy to do that. If you want to come, why don't you do it right now while we stand and sing.